I was looking at our past conversation and I thought it would be interesting to see who the audience were, their demographic. And the age group were 20 to 40-year-olds, really 18 to 40-year-olds. My question to you is, in their lives, in that demographic's lives, what do you think the biggest challenge is? Because both your kids, Julian and Michaela, both fit into that category as well. What is the greatest challenge that demographic face?
Well, the biggest challenges we had with our kids was, I think the biggest challenge I had in my generation was negotiating the years between 13 and 15, something like that. But my sense is now the biggest challenge to young people is negotiating the transition into adulthood identity. And I think that's partly why we have this terrible war in our culture about what constitutes identity. And I think the reason that identity has become such a problem is that our concepts of identity are unbelievably unsophisticated, narrow, hedonistic, and self-serving. So the identity groups that have popped up are all, you could say, whim-based identity groups. They're sexual identity, say, or something arbitrary like sex or race or ethnicity, something arbitrary. But the sexual identity groups are particularly interesting because the idea that that's your identity is predicated on the notion that there isn't anything more vital to you than the immediacy of your sexual behavior. Well, you're not a sex machine. You're not a short-term sex machine. That's not what a human being is. So if you revert to that, all you're going to do is produce like anxiety, hopelessness, and misery. It's not a good solution. So then you might say, well, what's the solution? And the solution is something called a subsidiary solution. It's like, so what's your identity? Well, you should get your act together and take care of yourself. So you have to integrate yourself. You have to integrate across anxiety and hatred and pain and jealousy and fear and hunger and lust and all that plethora of spirits that wage war within you.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. You have to bring that into a unity, okay? And one of the things Nietzsche said, the famous German philosopher, was that every drive attempts to philosophize in its spirit. So all those subordinate spirits that war inside you will try to dominate. I'm only my anger or rage. That's the protester type, you know. I'm only my sexuality. I'm only my appetite. That's the consumer model. But all that has to be integrated. And then you might say, well, integrated into what? Well, integrated into a structure that serves all of those spirits simultaneously and harmoniously across a long time. That's maturity. Okay, but that doesn't happen in isolation. So then there's stages above that. Okay, so the next thing is, maybe you've got your act together enough so that someone can tolerate being around you. So there's enough left over from you so you can play with someone else. So you establish a relationship, marriage, let's say. You invite someone else to join forces with you. You produce a united vision. Okay, so now there's you and there's you as husband. And it's the joint interplay of those that's now your identity. Okay, and so now you have a role and you have obligations and responsibilities and opportunities. You know, you say, well, I'm constrained by my marriage. You know, there's all sorts of things I can't do, which really means I can no longer, in the most primitive way, it means I can no longer immediately gratify my short-term whims. Although it could also be more complex in that I don't get to pursue the things that I need to pursue, which means you haven't negotiated with your wife very well. Like if your marriage is a prison, you're either very immature in what you want or you haven't negotiated properly. If you've done it well, you've got your individual unity established, and then there's a unity within the marriage that's better. And why would it be better? Well, you could learn to love someone, and that would be better because getting outside yourself decreases your anxiety. So we know as psychologists, one of the things that was learned 20 years ago is that there's no difference between thinking about yourself and what you want and being miserable. Those are self-consciousness and negative emotion are so tightly tied together that they're statistically indistinguishable.
Does that not raise the question about the decline of religion?
Absolutely. Well, that's the next level. It's like, okay, so there's you, now you're a husband, right? And so your identity is those two things in lockstep. But that's not enough. Now maybe you're a father. Now you have kids. Now you have a whole nother level of responsibility and opportunity to flesh yourself out and support and love, right? So now, and then, well, you've got your family together. That's not enough. You've got the community to serve. So you want to serve the community, and then communities scale. You know, maybe you're good in your local business and you have a local business organization and you're good in that. And then, well, then there's the town level and the city level and the state level and the country level. And then, you know, America is one nation under God. That's the ultimate level of this hierarchy of identity. And that's what should be served most fundamentally. That's a definition, okay? God is that which should be served most fundamentally. It's a definition. So when you're thinking that B is better than A, what you're saying, even if you don't know it, is that B is a step from A on the road to God. That's what you're saying. The medieval definition of God was something like the sum of all that is good, or the essence of what is good. And so if you believe that there is a good, then lurking behind that is the spirit of all of that which is good. That's God by definition. Now, you can debate forever about what that is, but it is something you live in relationship to. Like that's absolutely inescapable. And you might say, well, I don't believe in God. And then I would say, well, do you believe in good? And you'll say, no. I say, well, then you can't act, because you act towards a good, or you're not motivated.
I called Simon Gunning, who's the CEO of Campaign of Living Miserably. It's a big mental health charity here. And I said, give me the updated stats. He said to me, 19 to 35-year-olds, which is that demographic that are listening to this predominantly, are twice as likely to report being in crisis than any other group.
Right. And there's a reason. It's a very straightforward reason. It's literally this. The more you are focused on yourself, the more miserable you are. It's as simple as that.
But that's society now these days.
I know. Well, and there are terrible forces pushing us in that direction. You know, like I could attribute this to the idiocies of a degenerate Protestant liberalism driven by postmodernism. But you could also just as easily point to consumerist capitalism. It's like, it's all about you. It's all about what you want. Worse, it's all about what you want right now. Worse, it's all about what your basest appetites want, regardless of cost, right now. Well, that's the same as being 2 years old. There's nothing about that and why do you think that's you anyways? It's like, since when did what you are become what the most idiotic part of you, who cares nothing about anything else and any other people, wants right now? Why is that you?
How about this though? So this is where I'm trying to make a distinction is responsibility is a good thing. But with responsibility, sometimes comes this idea that it's about me, my outcomes are about me, it's all about me, my success and failure are a consequence of me.
Yeah, well, right, absolutely. Well, that's why the classical Christian philosophy has always been that you cannot infer someone's moral worth by the level of accomplishment. So the aristocrats would have said, the Roman aristocrats would have said, well, look at me. Like, it's pretty obvious, speaking to a slave, say, it's pretty obvious that I'm better than you. First of all, I can slap you and there's not a goddamn thing you can do about it. And you have to do what I tell you to do. And I've got all the money and all the stuff. And I can make all the decisions. And I have all the power. Clearly, that's evidence that I'm morally superior to you.
But didn't they believe that a god had granted them that superiority to some degree? So didn't they often believe in fortune as the...
Sure.
Well,
sure. Of course they did. That just made it even better. It's like, the fact that I've got the power is a reflection of the fact that the cosmic order is clearly on my side.
And we believe that less now because of the decline of religion. So we now think that our outcomes are more determined by our own actions.
Yes, but lurking underneath that is there's a hidden God lurking underneath all that too. It's just that the God has become subjectivity. It's something like that. When God talks to Moses out of the depths of the burning bush, he says, I am what I am. And that's what every degenerate Protestant liberal says now. I am what I am. And they also say, and if you don't go along with it, the consequences for you are going to be pretty damn dismal. use my pronouns, adopt my identity, play the game that the worst part of me insists on, or else. And it is a consequence. I said Protestant liberalism for a reason. Like, as we've moved away from God, we've moved into a radical subjectivity. Now, the problem with that is that a radical subjectivity, especially one of impulse, is unbelievably immature and counterproductive. It just doesn't work any more than a room full of 2-year-olds works.
What's a better idea?
This subsidiary structure. It's the adoption of voluntary responsibility. Way more complex identity. It's like, take on the load. Take someone in your life, make a permanent relationship, work it out, have some kids, serve your society at all these different levels.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.